Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of our discussion with Brogan on the economy and COVID-19. Today, we are going to talk about the role of economic development organizations during these unusual times. I am Akofa, Dossou, Director of Economic Research at Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. And for those who missed our first part discussion on FDI with Brogan, Paul, can you please reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do at ROI?
Sure. Thanks very much, Akofa. My name is Paul Brogan. I'm Vice President Client Services at ROI Research on Investment up here in Montreal in Canada. We're an economic development, consulting, and lead generation firm. For the past 16 or so years, we've been working with economic development groups all over the world.
Great. Welcome back. Excited to have you for the second talk here. So my first question is, do you anticipate companies to still consider new locations during this period of COVID-19? And if so, what sectors do you think those companies will be in?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question. And, the short answer is yes. We've been seeing it as part of our work on a day-to-day basis at ROI. We continue to do outreach on behalf of our clients all over the world. So we're continuing to identify companies that are in growth mode, companies that are expanding, companies with confirmed projects in mind. So there's certainly a lot of optimism in the market. Now, that's not to say every company we speak to is that positive. Obviously, we're hearing from a lot of companies that, right now they're in survival mode, or, they're trying to figure out their supply chain. So any expansion projects are on hold. But there are certainly still companies out there growing and expanding. And again, something to keep in mind is very often these projects and locations have been 2-3 years in the planning. So certainly, this kind of blip or a bump, it's going to, slow down their planning for sure. But we don't see it as completely stopping a lot of projects right now. If there's sectors we're seeing, more success in, obviously, it's very well publicized, companies that are doing well right now, e-commerce, online, streaming, online entertainment. These companies are doing quite well. Companies that seem to be struggling, obviously anything related to the aerospace sector. It's already been a pretty tough year for some companies in that sector. And now with what's happening to the airlines, that's certainly, it's creating a pretty poor outlook for a lot of companies in the aerospace supply chain. But overall, yes, we are seeing, companies expanding, although certainly there are companies that are, putting everything on the back burner for a little bit until things calm down.
Okay, well, that sounds promising and looks more optimistic here for companies and developers willing to keep and retain companies during these unusual times. So speaking of sectors, let's go a little bit deep in, have a deeper look into one of the sectors, if not manufacturing, maybe supply chain. Do you have any practical suggestions on understanding supply chains and leveraging for new business recruitment during these times?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very good question. And that's one we've been receiving quite a bit, ourselves here. One of the main things, we like to kind of comment on here, the best way to understand the supply chains in your region is to really understand companies in your region. So who are, the manufacturers in your region? Do you know the CEO? Do you know the heads of those companies? Really talking to them. What are their supply chain issues? You may talk to a company in the electronics sector and they may say, we can't get part A because it's usually shipped from China. Do they know of any competitors that may be in other markets, that may be in the US or other, potential vendors of those products, and use that as a business recruitment strategy? So really getting to understand and know your existing client base and
Yeah.
who are their suppliers and who are their clients.
Mm-hmm.
Very often, and I had a conversation with a client just yesterday. She was speaking to one of her existing aerospace companies in the region, who mentioned that, hey, one of our suppliers is based out of Taiwan. They're planning on moving a facility into the US in the next 2 to 3 years. Maybe you should talk to them. We could really help you pitch the region and present it as a great place to do business. So I think a really key asset to understanding supply chains and how they might impact your region is definitely speaking to your existing businesses. They know best, and they can very often make those introductions. And obviously there's other data sources as well you can dig into to define, different supply chain linkages.
Yeah.
But I think the most basic and the easiest to really implement right now is reaching out to and speaking to your existing manufacturing base.
Great advice there, Paul. And so how do you think you were talking a little bit about recruitment strategy? How can economic development organizations or developers adjust their recruitment strategy during this difficult time? And what unique opportunities are out there for them?
Yeah, it's certainly a unique time. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. And one thing, again, from talking to our clients, and from kind of reading online, and there's been a lot of discussion lately. I think the number one priority for economic developers right now really should be supporting your local business. Making sure that you're retaining the jobs, retaining the business in your region. And again, not to say that recruitment is not important. I mean, you can't ignore it, but I think for the short term, certainly making sure that your existing businesses have the tools to grow and maintain and survive right now, it should be the number one priority. Having said that, it can also create opportunities, as I mentioned, for really helping, build your understanding of who's in the region. It can really help you understand what are the supply chain gaps. As I mentioned, to the previous question, I'm building these relationships with your existing businesses, letting them know that you're here to help. It can really help, and it might sound a little self-serving in a way, but it can help your marketing down the road. It can really show that you're invested in supporting a business. So when you're speaking to a prospect, next month or 2 or 3 months down the road, you can have real tangible examples of, once you come to our region, this is how we can support you. This is what we did during the crisis. We dropped everything we could to support our existing businesses. And your existing business can become real champions for you as well. When they talk about, what happened in 2020, when business almost shut, Akofa and her team were there to help them find new suppliers, to help them find new export channels. Right. So it might sound a little, backwards, you're not really leaning too heavily on business recruitment in the short term, but I think the long-term investment in the goodwill and assets that you can get from your community will certainly pay dividends in the long term. And having said that, again, important not to forget it completely. I'm sure you've probably been working on projects. It's definitely worth checking in on your prospects. Has this impacted your project? How can we help? Is there anything you might need? Just using it as a good opportunity to touch base and show that you're human. I think that's a key part definitely of any of this process. Showing that you're human and showing that you care.
Yes, definitely. So making sure to retain and support and keeping up with existing businesses, but let's not forget about the prospects too, because we still have to keep in touch with them and making sure that always insisting that we are there for them during this difficult time. Thank you, Paul. So let's talk a little bit more about other stakeholders in here, like private sector investors. What role do you think private sector investors should play in supporting economic development organizations while COVID-19 is impacting severely businesses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I mean, again, we have to put on the hat and put ourselves in the shoes of your private investors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's their situation right now? You know, are they considering laying off people? Are they, you know, in a financial crunch? Are they running out of stock? Or maybe it's the opposite. You know, maybe they're insanely busy because of some sort of opportunity that they've noticed through this whole process. But, you know, ultimately, you know, I think the private sector investors and the role that they can play right now is in giving you the information and the intelligence to take action on supply chain issues. So again, I wouldn't want to lean too heavily on my private investors right now, again, based on the kind of challenges they may be seeing. I would be positioning myself more as a support to them as opposed to vice versa. However, you know, I think they could play a role in keeping you up to date on what's happening. So I would maybe try and have like a weekly touch point with my private investors to really talk about, okay, what's your biggest challenge this week? You know, what's your biggest opportunity you see in the next 2 or 3 weeks? And they can really be a great sounding board for how you develop your strategy over the next 2 to 3 weeks as you look at how to prioritize, you know, your resources and your efforts. You know, they may say, you know, we need more financial support for our team. You know, they may say, look, we're having issues because the ports are shut down. We need alternative routes to get our product into our factory. So I think really just using them as a sounding board for what's going on in the market on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis is critical, as opposed to trying to lean on them for support. I would try and position it as, you know, we need your help so we can help you.
Yeah, and I think one way to do that also is to conduct a survey, send out a survey to those private investors and anyone involved in the business community to gather that kind of information and be able to use that information to support businesses that need help, and if not, all of them need help at this moment. And this is exactly one of the things that we are doing here at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, putting out a comprehensive economic impact survey out to our investors and members and members of the business community in general to show that we are there to listen and to support. And my last question for you, Paul, is what should economic development organizations do in the short, medium, and long term to prepare for the business climate post-COVID-19?
That's a great question, and I feel like if I knew all the answers to that, I'd be an awful lot wealthier than I currently am. But look, for me, I think, you know, some of the changes that we're going to see is, you know, basically like what we're doing right now. I think there's probably going to be less travel, less corporate travel over the next couple of years. I think what this is teaching us is that it is possible to get a lot of value out of online and virtual meetings. So I think being prepared to operate in a world where your meetings with partners, prospects, suppliers, maybe even investors may become more online, you know, and becoming more comfortable in using these kind of technologies. Something else to consider is, you know, what we've seen, and certainly even what I've seen in our office is, you know, there's going to be more of a trend to, especially office workers, working from home. So this is going to have, you know, potentially an impact, you know, medium to long term in, you know, office real estate in any given city. You know, companies may look at, you know, I know our company, for example, you know, we've 50 or so people all working remotely right now.
Yeah.
You know, companies may look at it and see, hey, maybe we need 20, 30% less real estate. You know, so that could have an impact in, you know, the Class A office real estate market in your region. But I think in general, you know, one of the biggest, you know, not upheavals we're going to see is this shift around supply chains. You know, again, this has really exposed international supply chains and how fragile they can be. I mean, we already saw there was a little bit of a shift with China, you know, over the last couple of years with all the talk around tariffs and you know, those kind of issues. There's already been quite a strong push toward reshoring into the United States and North America in general. And I think we're going to see more of that over the next couple of years. You know, I think this has really opened people's eyes to, you know what, we have vital parts of our supply chain in Italy, in Europe, you know, across the UK, Germany, Latin America, Asia Pacific. You know, these kind of things, they come up out of nowhere, literally like almost out of nowhere, and they have to be able to adapt. So I think we're going to see more of a trend toward reshoring into the US as companies, where they can, are going to move, you know, these supply chain operations back onshore. So I think being prepared to have your story ready, again, talk to your existing client base, understand where the supply chain gaps and how you can help them fill it.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Paul. We appreciate you here at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, and we hope to talk to you more about the trends and what's happening in the economy very, very soon, I hope. Thank you and everyone, and this concludes our second talk for this two-part series. Stay safe and take care.
Thanks very much, Akofa. It was an absolute pleasure. Happy to talk at any time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.